Hi everyone, I'm Uncle Yeow. Welcome to my channel, Uncle Yeow and the Singapore Story. Now, why Singapore Story, you may ask? Well, I've been the Singapore Story Guide for the last 10 years, and I've conducted many Singapore Story tours for Singaporean families, school groups, army boys, corporates, foreign visitors, VIPs, and tourists. And they all were very impressed at how Singapore managed to transform from a third world backwater into a first world city-state garden city, all within one generation. So what is the Singapore story? Well, the number one author and writer of the Singapore story is none other than our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Of course, he had a lot of help from his co-writers, comrades in arms, people like Dr. Goh Keng Swee, our economic architect, defense architect, Mr. S. Rajaratnam, who is actually our foreign relations expert, creating international space, friendship for Singapore, Mr. Lim Kim San, our builder of HDB flats, PSA, Yusof Ishak, our first president, and then you have others like E.W. Barker for law, Toh Chin Chai, education, and many others, especially the pioneer generation leaders. They have all contributed to the success of Singapore thus far and are actually the writers of the Singapore story. Now, in 1978, Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese paramount leader, visited Singapore, and he was so impressed that he complimented Lee Kuan Yew and said, "Oh, you have done a very good job in converting Singapore from a backwater into a metropolis." Now, what LKY told him actually surprised him. LKY said, "In fact, Singaporeans are all peasants, descendants of peasant farmers from southern China. Whereas in China, you have a lot of intellect, literacies. So if you were to open up China and reform, China would surpass Singapore one day." Now, Deng Xiaoping was taken aback, but he kept quiet. But when he went back to China, the Chinese government started sending all their officials to Singapore to study the Singapore story and to understand and appreciate. And they brought it back to implement what they call so-called Singapore story, or to them, the Singapore model. In Chinese, it means 新加坡模式. Now, this in a way has started the rise of China. And today, indeed, China has surpassed Singapore in many ways. Many of their major cities like Shanghai, Chongqing, Shenzhen has actually overtaken us. So there's a lot of merits in our Singapore story. A lot of world leaders are very keen to learn about the Singapore story. And even in Africa, you have the country of Rwanda. The president, Paul Kagame, is actually an avid fan of the Singapore story. And today, Rwanda has developed from a war-torn country into one of the most successful economy in Africa. So if all the countries and the leaders and people are so keen to learn about the Singapore story, don't you think it's even more important for us Singaporeans to have a better grasp of the Singapore story and understanding and appreciation, so that we can inculcate and strengthen our national identity and resilience to face future challenges? That is the purpose of me sharing the Singapore story. Now, in the forthcoming episodes, I'll be taking you through the Singapore story, beginning with Second World War, Japanese invasion of Malaya and Singapore, followed by the fall of Singapore, and then Japanese occupation, 3 years and 8 months of Japanese occupation, which is the darkest period in our history. At the end of the war, we then began on our road towards independence and how we overcame the odds to become an independent country, having gone through merger, separation from Malaysia, and thereafter finally becoming independent in 1965. But there was a multitude of problems that we have to overcome, especially in the area of housing, defense, economy, and society. So all this we have overcame, and we have now come to what Singapore is today. So understanding where we come from and how we got here is so ever important, especially for our younger generation. And that is the reason why I wanted to share the Singapore story with you. So if you are keen and interested, I hope you like, subscribe, and share. I hope to see you in the next episode of our Singapore story. Adios. Thank you.